Hello everybody, welcome to Crafty Soup. My name is Misty, where I play with paper and photos in artful ways. And this is the time where I share my Mystery Box Monday monthly project with you, and I reach into my mystery box of supplies without looking, pull out some items, and then get to work on a project. This time around, we're going to be making pockets and flaps. We're going to be doing mixed media inking and stamping, so let's dive into this project. All right, here is my box as usual, and I've got my face on the screen to see my reactions to things as we go. I can't often do live voicing just because I share space with my husband and I can't catch his conference calls in the background, although you might hear laundry in the background since we both work in the basement. Anyway, I am reaching into my box and pulling out a few things, and at first I get some embellishments, and then I get a stamp set, and then I feel this bottle and I grab it, and it is a tube of stickles, and I'm really happy with all of these supplies. In fact, these say that they are wood shapes, even though that they are heavily painted and they look like chipboard, they do feel more like wood, and we'll see that in a minute. And this stamp set is pretty sweet. I find the shapes pretty usable if you ignore the lips. And since I've got a beachy set, I know exactly where my project is going to go because I had the very next day planned a little beach outing with my husband, going to visit some friends who were camping at the beach, but we couldn't join them for the whole thing, so we went out for the day. So that is my plan. Let's grab a bunch of supplies, including all kinds of OXIDE inks, because I'm going to create a beachy scene with my OXIDE inks. And that way I don't need to use a lot of extra pattern papers from my stash, though you will see there I was knocking on those pieces because they are wood and they have a very nice feel to them. And here is the pattern paper that I will pull in for this project. Now this is a winter pattern paper, but it has a lot of usable patterns in here for other things, including these very mild colors that really go well with those wood embellishment pieces. So I'm pulling out a few pieces, or I already did pull out a few pieces that I know will work well for this. I am going to start with the mixed media, including those stickles, because that stuff will need time to dry. And like I said, I am going to create a beachy scene. So I am starting off with, I believe this is Uncharted Mariner, and I'm creating an ocean down at the bottom. I switched to Mermaid Lagoon, and I am sure not to ink up my blending foam very heavily at all because I really want a very light color, and in fact it's a little bit blotchy, which lends to kind of a cloudiness. I am going to tone this down with a little bit of this Lost Shadow color, which is a gray toned color, and that kind of brings the skies more in alignment with what we typically have in the Pacific Northwest, which is more overcast days. However, it was a lovely day when we did end up going to the beach. Now I haven't gotten my pictures printed out to add to this, but you'll see how I do create placeholders for those pictures. I did add a little bit more of that Mermaid Lagoon to my ocean, and here I've got gathered twigs, which can be quite a heavy dark brown, and again I am inking up my pad and then tapping off most of the ink to get more of a sandy color, and then I am going to add some water splatters, which is common when using these distressed inks because it does add some nice texture to everything, especially the ocean and a little bit to the sand. And you can see the water splotches there. I will dry those up and you can see how it removes some of that behind. Now the stickles color is called Frosted Lace, and I'm really liking this color because it doesn't have the greens and purples of a traditional iridescent glitter. It's pretty just white. And I'm going to use that to create the foamy waves on my beach scene. How sometimes it foams and sparkles in the sunshine. I did have to unclog it, and I splotched a whole bunch onto a scratch piece of paper as I was doing that, but I just used my finger to pick it up and spread it around, and that worked just fine, even though it was a little bit clogged. Now, this stickles is at least a year old. It's been sitting in my box for almost 2 years now, I think. And so it wasn't surprised. It had a small clog in it, but I got that out with a pin, and I was able to move on. Now, I forgot to do this before doing my stickles, so those stickles are still wet, and I was trying to be very careful to do this stamping without brushing into those stickles. Now, I'm doing a lot of very subtly toned stamping, including here using that blue and stamping it off twice and using the third impression to add some layers into this project. So I've got just a little few hearts up there in the clouds that look like it's kind of raining hearts, even though we had a lovely day. I'm putting some of these squiggle lines that are those postage stamp items into both my sand, my ocean, and then here I'm using my fingers to repeat that in the air with the lightest shadow color for some wind. So that was what I did with all of my inking and stamping to create this scene. I set that aside to dry, and I pulled out some more supplies to keep working while that is drying, including this Starburst punch from, I think that's from Stampin' Up! It's an older punch, but I love it, so it stays in my stash. I'm going to layer it up with just a solid circle and some washi tape to create embellishment clusters for this project. But before we get to that, I do need to create the base for where my photos are going to be, and that is where a pocket and some photo flaps are going to come into play. I'm doing photo flaps because this is an 8.5 by 11 size, and in order to get more photos onto this, I'm going to create flaps to reveal things. At first, I only create one flap, so that can leave room for 3 photos, one on top of the flap, one on the back side of the flap, and one hidden underneath the flap. And these are going to be, I write the size down somewhere. I think they're kind of atypically sized 3x, or maybe they are 3x4 photos. I can't remember. But anyway, I created this flap, and then you will see me tag it a little bit later so that I can remember that photo size when I do get to printing. And we'll see me turn that flap into a moving flap in a little bit. Here I am using some of the leftovers from creating that base zone for my photos and using those leftovers to create embellishment cluster parts and pieces. All right, here is where I'm creating my flap. I have this calendar washi tape that's an older Tim Holtz product, and I'm going to use the zone on that calendar that matches up with September, since that's the month we're in, and those are the photos I'm working on. And I will highlight those photos a little bit more. Maybe you can see those in the close-up. I think a lot of that got edited out. However, I am putting that tape there specifically for the month. I am sandwiching that tape in between the 2 photo flap pieces so that I can hide some of the washi tape, and I'll explain a little bit more about that as we go. This is going to be the base layer behind my flap, and that will give me a good kind of neutral background to add more photos to. And speaking of having neutral backgrounds, as I glue this washi tape because it is older, I wanted none of that washi tape to cover up any of that blue flap base. That is why I sandwiched it in between, and you'll see me do some things to work around that as we work inside. I want all of that blue base to be a solid border around my photos for when I get to printing out the photos. So if I put a piece of washi tape over the blue, that would end up being part of the photo mat, and I didn't want that. So on the back side, this is where I realize I can't do another piece of washi tape all the way across, so I am going to hide the back side of that washi tape with some more washi. I'm going to set this piece aside that I was working on, and I'm going to go back to that leftover, I thought I used the leftover calendar print. Yep, I do peel it off there. I'm going to use the rest of that to just cover up the sticky backside of the first piece of washi tape, and it's not perfect, but I'm doing the best I can. I will de-tack any extra stick with some anti-static powder from my embossing set, so that's how I will get around any tackiness that's left over. So I do that on both sides, and then I can layer up more washi tape onto my background as I build up more stuff behind here. So yes, there will be some extra washi tape in the background behind a third photo if I put a third photo in there. Actually, I have more. I'm going to have to build another flap because I took more photos than I anticipated, or I liked more of the photos I took than I anticipated. I often take a lot of photos and they don't come out, but that's the beauty of digital photography, because I can take as many as I want and pick and choose the ones that are good. All right, I have started layering up the embellishments. I am going to add a little bit more stamping to these embellishment backgrounds. It's very, very subtle, but in person you can see it better than you can on camera. Even in person, it's pretty subtle. I thought I was ready to move on, but those stickles take a very long time to dry, so I'm going back to more of the structure. Here's my note where I wrote down different things, including the measurements of that pocket that I created so that I can create this journaling tag that will fit nicely inside of that pocket, and I won't have to struggle with trimming it after the fact. I measured ahead of time to know how wide my distance was between my tape when I taped it down. I did think about making this a 4-sided journaling tag because I tend to talk a lot. And I decided to just glue it closed because I think it was getting just a little too bulky. So it's just, I glued it closed, and it now is a double-sided journaling tag. And I realized I forgot to add some washi detail to this before I glued that tab down. So I carefully peeled it back off, and luckily the glue was still wet enough that I could do it without too much damage. Washi tape's covering up any extra damage that I'm doing, and then I can glue it back closed. And there are some of the details that I'm adding to this tag. I'm going to add a little bit more stamping details down here to the bottom, and I am using darker ink on this point because it will have to hold its own against my black journaling when I get to that part. I am adding a little bit more washi tape, and again, my washi tape has gotten old and the tacky is just not there, and so I am gluing it in place. Here is where I am creating some journaling lines with my favorite journaling stamp. I'm using that very light Lost Shadow color so that those journaling lines will mostly disappear as I write my journaling with my black ink. I am adding some of that to the back as well, and a couple stamped details to the back as well. And that will finish off this journaling tag. And I'm telling you, as this project is coming together, I'm really loving the details that I pulled out of my stash. Last month I used 90% of the stuff from the box, and it wasn't as exciting to me. It was fine, but it wasn't exciting. This one, I pulled in more stuff from my stash, and I'm liking it a lot better. So while I try to make the box supplies the star of the show, I think I got a good balance here between adding in extra stuff and still keeping those box supplies, front and center as they should be. All right, I have got everything, all the stickles are dried with the help of my heat gun. I have got my photo block ready to go. I am adding these detailed embellishment blocks. They didn't quite, I tried to get the stamping and the items planned out so that when I tucked things that I wouldn't hide anything, but not knowing how all the sizes were fitting together very well because my stickles were still wet, I misjudged some of those sizing. So I had to decide where things were going to go and which things were going to get covered up despite putting the effort into creating them. And so that's why you see me moving some things around, including forgetting some more washi tape, having to peel that off the background. And yes, it did tear my background because it was mostly dry already. However, once again, I'm going to use some washi tape to hide a lot of that, and that item will get glued back down right over where the damage is, so you will never know if you don't watch this video that happened. All right, a few more washi details down here at the bottom of this whole photo block, and I am liking these washi details. I'm glad I pulled out plenty of washi tapes in those colors. Now, this I pulled up, and I'm glad I did because I realized some of that washi tape wasn't sticking and needed glue. I had just temporarily tacked it using just a portion of the foam tape that I had adhered to the back, just to hold it in place to help me get those elements aligned how I wanted them. And then once that foam tape was fully adhered down, then I've got everything in place where I want to go. I left a little room for a title in case I want to do that later, depending on how my photos came out. Again, doing this voiceover, I already know what the photos are, but at that time I did not know what I was going to have. So this is how the project turned out. Like I said, I will add one more flap to that. It's not going to make it onto this video, but I hope to get those projects posted to my Instagram or my blog, and so you can see how that turned out in the very, very end. And again, I am very happy with how this one came out. I'm going to leave you with some of these close-up photos, including some of my notes, some of the stamping details that you can see, and just a closer look at how all of these pieces came together, including that Stickles ocean foam wave fluff. All right, that wraps up this video. I thank you so much for joining me, and I will be back one more time. Let's see, today is Monday. I will be back twice more, I believe, this month for some videos for you. In the meantime, I am going to be getting ready for my Crop and Create Delivered Stamping Weekend, which I'm very much looking forward to. I hope you have some exciting plans for this week, and until next time, I hope you have an artful day.